Hi, I'm Mark Loepker with the Cyber Center for Education and Innovation, home of the National Cryptologic Museum. I'm very excited today to be able to share with you information about the big idea risk. A little bit about my background. Spent 43 years in government service, 25 of that in the Air Force, 18 of that at the National Security Agency. Since about 1990, I've been involved in computer security activities, most of it in this topic of risk. This kind of combines and pulls everything you're learning in all the big ideas together in a relationship that looks across the spectrum. And so when you look at the risk big idea, it's going to explore vulnerabilities. It's going to explore the adversary, the person who can attack you. And it's going to look at what are the impacts, in fact, if that adversary succeeds. And in that analysis, there's a trade-off to be done to determine what kind of preventions, or we call them countermeasures, can be added to any particular system to prevent that adversary, or at least thwart that adversary from taking advantage of your system. So it's a relationship between the chance that some harm will occur and what damage would exist if, in fact, that person succeeded or that entity exceeded. Risk assessment is all about a methodology that combines all these attributes that you've been learning into what is called cybersecurity risk. It's very uncertain, and the complex nature of our cyber environment complicates this particular area of study. But it's one of those interesting ones that I've enjoyed for over 20 some odd years because it's always new and it's always fresh. And it causes you the opportunity to work through puzzles and to really determine what would the adversary do. First of all, we'll look at some essential questions in this. We'll look at what is the difference between a risk, a vulnerability, and a threat. We'll look at how do you model those risks, because they're very complex models that can be used to help us. And what is the practice of an adversary who is trying to attack your system? What are their methods, their means, their motives for attacking you? We'll look at the fact that computer systems are easy to change. And so the complexity of that, the complexity of changing software when you didn't intend to be changed, or hardware, contribute to that complexity of cybersecurity risk. And lastly, they'll take a look at that dynamic, distributed, ubiquitous nature of computing that is all over the place, all the way from the Internet of Things to your local iPhone to your local desktop computer. Now, in the very beginning, we'll begin to differentiate between the threats, vulnerabilities, and attacks. And this is very important because one of the things, I'd like to use the analogy of your house. If you look at your house contains assets that you want to protect. It contains your TV set. It contains your food, even all the furniture, all your particular computer equipment, entertainment equipment, your jewelry, your money, everything that you hold dear to your existence in your house. That house surrounds all of those assets. Now you have entrances into that house, ways that you get in and out. So that door is a capability for you to get into your house. That door is also a vulnerability. And that's what the students will learn in this section. They'll learn that a vulnerability is the other side of the coin to a lot of times that capability. So how do we protect that vulnerability of the door? There's many different countermeasures that can be applied to the door. You have deadbolt locks, regular locks, alarm systems, etc. So we'll take a look at how you analyze the best way to approach that. We'll take a look at the attack paths. The attack paths are, in fact, that door, the windows in your house. Those are ways for an adversary, attacker, to get into your house. Now, attacker can be a human, or it can be a natural attack, like a flood or a tornado. So attacks can be both natural and unnatural if you talk about a human being. And that human being can be intentional or unintentional in getting. Perhaps the mailman who's delivering a package unintentionally breaks into the house. So we'll take a look at all those attributes and differentiate between those threats, vulnerabilities, and attacks. Because remember, a vulnerability is the weakness that gets into your system that can be exploited. Then we'll really dive into what is that threat. That threat is the adversary, if it's a human, it's a tornado, if it's natural, who can exploit that vulnerability either intentionally or explicitly going after what you have. And we'll look at how do you identify and prioritize the protection of those information assets, the things in your house, based upon who could attack it. If you live in a community that is has lots of outward security to where it's a very low probability of an attacker even getting to your house, then you probably don't need to lock the door. If you're in a community that doesn't have those protections where an attacker can actually get to your front door, then you need to protect the door. The point here is the students will learn how to assess that risk. Not every vulnerability needs to be fixed. It depends upon the attacker. It depends upon the vulnerability of that attacker or that probability that the attacker can exploit that vulnerability. So we'll talk about how to prioritize that. If you spend $600 fixing a vulnerability and it's only worth $200, then it's not worth the extra $400. So we'll look at those trade-off questions and how to do those trade-offs associated against the probable exploitation by an attacker. Because you don't want to spend more money than what it's worth to protect it. We'll look at what are the standards of testing and assessing those particular countermeasures that you're trying to apply to protect your assets from the attacker. Now, the trade-offs are very important to the total cost and the benefits, and it really is a cost-benefit type of an analysis. What is your mission? Also, the assets in your house may not be of equal quality. You may have some very expensive jewelry or some firearms that you want to protect from being stolen. So the countermeasure there may be putting them in a safe and buying the safe. And so that you've spent a lot of money on a safe and put it in your house. But the other things in your house, you say, okay, if somebody breaks in and takes them, that's fine, but they didn't get my jewelry. They didn't get the critical items that I've placed in this very impressive safe that will thwart any adversary from getting to. So those cost-benefit trade-offs will be discussed during this particular section. Now, cyberspace is very large and complex. We alluded to this with the Internet of Things. So these provide complexities that we don't always have control over. We don't always have control over somebody changing software on these large, unpredictable systems. So we have to plan for that. We have to analyze how somebody else's system may in fact affect our system. So the complexities of the behavior of a computer system will be taken into account in this class. The adversary himself has attributes that the students will learn about. What are the motives? Does that adversary have access? How much money would it take? What is the benefit to the adversary in exploiting your asset? Those are attributes that we determine and study to see if the adversary is going to take advantage of this particular attack vector. If in fact the adversary, it is not in their best interest to do so, then they may ignore that vulnerability for another vulnerability. That comes into the calculation of which vulnerability to actually spend your money against to fix. The whole decentralized and dynamic aspect of the network sometimes will fail on its own, and we can't predict that. So part of risk analysis is to determine the resilience of your system. If you are part of a complex system that you don't have control of many of the attributes of that system, then there are other countermeasures you may need to look at, like backup systems that are off-site, so that you can recover your data if in fact there's a failure. So these attributes will be looked at as well to determine what's important. There's also communication between people. And when we rely on lots of different systems, that communication can be interrupted by what we call man in the loop, or somebody in the middle listening, eavesdropping, so to speak, on your conversation. And whether it's encrypted or not, that information can be analyzed and traffic can be analyzed to determine what is the real intent of that communication. So there's a lot of incorrect assumptions that can be made based on loss of confidentiality, or somebody discovering what you're doing. Could be a loss of the integrity. Somebody could change the information that you are passing back and forth, or somebody can prevent that information from even getting to you, or availability. So we take a look at that confidentiality, integrity, and availability as aspects of risk analysis. Cryptography can also be used as a countermeasure. In this particular area in risk, we'll take a look at how cryptography can be used as a benefit. So the risk module, the risk big idea, has got lots of opportunities to look at those factors, the threat, the vulnerability, and the adversary, and to look at the complex calculations that are needed to determine what are the best ways to spend those scarce dollars. We will not fix all vulnerabilities, and there's no way to have a system that isn't vulnerable. The whole purpose of risk is the calculation of, have we done enough? So I look forward to you getting involved in this particular section and how it blends into the rest of the framework.